welcome new people, welcome regulars, welcome people who come from time to time. The online space that we have here is a space that enables us to come together and support ourselves in the cultivation of balance, peace, love, as we meet the challenges of modern living. No mean feat. And so the coming together of everybody here is a terrific support for each of us as we do that. So thank you for being here today. We are the Armadale Meditation Group still, hasn't been renamed yet, and that's a part of the Buddhist Society of Western Australia, which has been meeting for 30-something years and is now an online space where people from a lot of different parts of the world can join. 9 months of the year we have monks from Bodhinyana Monastery, where Ajahn Brahm is the abbot who teach us, and for 3 months of the year while the monks are on rains retreat, lay teachers come in and give it our best shot. Each week we have 30 minutes approximately of an introduction talk, 30 minutes approximately of meditation, and then 30 minutes after the meditation for a bit more talk or for questions and answers. And the tradition of this group is that we start the night with chanting the Metta Sutta, and that's the Buddha's words on loving kindness. Tonight, Sky, who I think is in Florida, has kindly agreed to chant the Metta Sutta for us. And before she does that, I'm just going to put up a slide because it can help each of us as we chant along with Sky. We'll all be on mute, but we'll be able to hear Sky. It helps us if we can connect with that sense. So I'm just going to have a look. Marlene, what's share? Oh, maybe I'm pressing the wrong thing. That's it. Here we go. So can you see my slide now? Mm-hmm. So it can help us before we start chanting the Metta Sutta to already ease into an orientation of kindness. So I've just got a few images there that for some of us might already help open the heart, soften the heart. Now, if you really hate dogs, sorry about that, and chickens and cats and men with babies, find your own image that will help you connect with a felt sense of kindness. I'm going to take this slide down and Marlene will put up the words of the Metta Sutta. And we are delighted to have Sky as the person who will chant for us today.
The Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be happy. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be happy. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another, even as a mother protects with her life, her child, her only child. So, with a boundless heart, should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down. Free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding, by not holding to fixed views. The pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born into this world. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Many thanks, Sky. So each of the 4 weeks that I'm teaching, the meditation that I am doing is connected to one of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And this week, being the 3rd week, the meditation is related to mindfulness of mind. And just a reminder, or for some people it might be hearing it for the first time, in the Pali language, which is the language that the discourses of the Buddha that they've been preserved in, the word for mind, citta, includes what we might put under a heading of heart, of emotions, feelings, reactions. So in today's meditation, we'll be looking at bringing mindfulness to that inner experience of thoughts, feelings, emotions, reactions, attitudes, that kind of thing. In the first week that I taught, we looked at mindfulness of the body. The second week, we looked at mindfulness of feeling tone or Vedana, that quality that every experience has that is either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Now, there's so much more in the Satipatthana Sutta than I am able to touch on in these short periods that we have together. So please feel free to go ahead and explore, research, look further if you're interested in finding out more. I'm not covering in any way comprehensively the content of the Satipatthana Sutta. And there's a few things I'll say before we get to the meditation. And as you listen to what I talk about, you might bring that orientation of developing mindfulness of mind, heart already. So you might notice how your mind is from time to time. Noticing any reactions, urges, impulses, thoughts, feelings that might arise. And just like we notice a sensation of the body, an itch of the body, we can stand back from what's going on in the mind and notice what is going on in the mind. It's not so straightforward because so often we just get intertwined with the content of the mind. So we're developing here the capacity to stand back and observe. How's your mind right now? So I'm going to tell a little story about riding through the cemetery. I ride a bike quite a bit and I regularly ride through Perth's oldest, I don't know if it's Perth's biggest cemetery, Karrakatta Cemetery for those who are locals. And riding through the cemetery has a lot of benefits for me. It's the most direct route to a number of places that I go. It's quiet, there's almost no traffic, so it's safe being on a bike. And it also is an opportunity to develop wisdom and also to develop the heart. As a heart practice, riding through the cemetery gives me regular contact with words that people write on the gravestones of their loved ones. It reminds me of the preciousness of family and friends. You know, I couldn't be reading, you know, the name of the person, beloved wife, husband, child. I might read name of so-and-so, much missed mother or father, gone but not forgotten. So riding through the cemetery really connects me with the heart and reminds me of the importance of the people in my life, and also a reminder of expressing some of those feelings while we're still alive rather than when they're underground. It's also an opportunity to be a wisdom practice, because soon enough I'm going to be gone, I'm going to be dead, and that helps remind me of how I'm reacting to the challenges of my life. You know, what am I worrying about? What am I adding to? What am I reacting to that is just at one level exacerbating a difficult situation? So it brings it's a support for bringing a bit of perspective to the things that I might get angry about or unhappy about. And the Satipatthana Sutta, which we are looking at, invites us, in fact, in the contemplation of the body, which we did in the first week, to think about death, to contemplate death. So there's a connection in riding through the cemetery too, with an encouragement by the Buddha to think about death, remember that we're mortal, know that this breath might be our last breath. Not as something that's morbid, but something that's encouraging, motivating to look at how we're living the days that we do. Recently, I was riding my bike through the cemetery, past the very big entrance, where it's the place where the hearses, which are the cars that carry the coffins, where they wait, and people who have come to pay their respects at the funeral gather. They gather there and then they walk either to the chapel behind the car or they walk to the graveside behind the car. Sometimes there's a hearse and mourners gathering, but often not. Unusually, this time, there were actually 2 hearses waiting. And I've not seen that before. And my mind, being a curious mind, started to wonder about how the people at the 2 funerals were perceiving which funeral they were showing up to. Because, you know, humans being what they are, I was wondering if people were judging which of the funerals would be the better funeral to be at. Did they want to be with at the funeral with the most mourners? Or did they want to be at a more discreet funeral? And it made me think about how we judge a life. One way, and I've heard people talk about people who've died in this way, one way to judge a life is by the number of people who show up at your funeral. But what of the person who's shy? Maybe from a family where relationships were broken and difficult. A person who preferred working alone, had solitary pastimes. Maybe there's only going to be a few people at their funeral. Does the number of people who are walking behind the hearse, behind the coffin, mean anything about the value of a person's life, the value of them as a human being? Do we judge their life based on the number of people who show up at their funeral? I'm really interested in the judging mind because I get to experience that and observe that not infrequently in this mind heart. And I'm interested in how I might reduce the amount of judging that the mind does. Judging of others, but also judging of myself. You know, having observed judging over the years, I know that it's accompanied by a tightness, a contraction in the body. It certainly disconnects me from others. It's an unpleasant mind state. Even though, you know, at times the judging can give us that little momentary buzz of superiority when it's of others, that's a short-lived little buzz, and then it's like, oh, that's not a helpful mind state. So it's an unpleasant mind state. And watching these two funerals assemble, it got me reflecting on judging as I'm riding through the cemetery, and really hit me how arbitrary judging can be, particularly around self-judgment. And I also have noticed that when self-judgment decreases, so too my judgment of others. So interesting. How might we work with self-judgment more skillfully? And I was thinking about all those people behind the cars, behind the coffins, and wondering how their self-judging worked, how their inner critic worked. How does it arise for you? What kinds of things does your inner critic judge you for? My inner critic judges me for not being selfless enough, thoughtful enough, caring enough. My inner critic judges me for eating too much. I'm just thinking about my dinner as I say that. I think it was okay. My inner critic judges me for not doing enough to save the world, not being good enough. They're the kinds of things that my inner critic can get excited about. My inner critic doesn't care too much about, I don't know if it's not at all, but it doesn't care too much about what I look like, what I wear, what car I drive, what my relatives do. It doesn't care too much that I haven't explored my artistic side, or that I didn't pursue a career to the highest possibility. But those things that my inner critic doesn't judge me for, I know other people have inner critics that they will be judged for, in terms of, you know, the car, the relatives, the work, that kind of thing. And so it really underscores how conditioned our inner critic is. Your inner critic might let you get away with things that my inner critic wouldn't let me get away with things, and vice versa. So thinking about that as I was riding through the cemetery, it was so useful to see the conditioned nature of the inner critic. There's nothing objective about it. We're all running around, at times being driven mad by different sets of measures, different standards, different self-judgments. So standing back from that inner critic and seeing the specific self-judgments felt really useful. And as I was riding along, I was also aware that the inner critic wasn't present as I was reflecting in this way, and that the inner critic isn't always there. In fact, it's often not there. It's often not present. It requires particular conditions to be present for it to jump up, and then it arrives with all its judgments and advice, and but it's certainly not a constant. So bringing mindfulness to the circumstances and the arrival of the inner critic can help us to recognize that we don't have to see those judgments as true. We don't have to see the advice it might be giving as useful. Rather, it's possible to relate to what the inner critic says as simply a pattern of conditioned thinking. And we can develop a wiser way of relating to it. Judgments are one of the ways that the mind-heart can react to a situation. And tonight we're putting a bit of a spotlight on the mind-heart in the meditation. So to warm us up, I have a few questions for you. And these questions are designed to help us be a little bit less attached to my mind-heart, to identify with it a little less, and to see that the human condition, being human, means that we all have a relatively similar range of mind states. So I'm going to ask you 10 questions. Keep a count of the questions that you answer yes to. You can just do this mentally. Actually, it might be easier to keep a count to the ones you answer no to, but it doesn't really matter. Have you ever been so angry that you shouted at someone you love? Have you ever been really embarrassed in front of people you wanted to impress? Have you been mean to a friend because they did something hurtful to you? Have you ever eaten so much you feel unwell? Have you ever felt envious of someone because they were better looking, better dressed, had a better car, better house, better job, better holiday, better children? Have you ever laughed at someone who made a mistake, even if it was only on TV? Have you ever been attracted to someone when you were in a committed relationship to someone else, even though you didn't act on it, but just that feeling of sexual attraction to somebody that is not your partner? Have you ever passed on a secret to a mutual friend, somebody else's secret? Have you ever thought you were right, convinced you were right in an argument and stuck to your guns only to find out you weren't? When I thought about the different unwholesome mind states and asking some questions around this, I was going to ask people to raise their hands, because I know from experience that most of us would have answered yes to most of the questions I asked, if not all. But just in case people were too embarrassed to raise their hands and and self-disclose in this kind of environment, I thought it might be prudent just to do it internally. The human condition is such that we all are liable to regularly experience desire, wanting, one basket of unwholesome mind states, aversion, ill will, anger, another basket, or ignorance and delusion. Unwholesome mind states visit all of us. Now I'm going to ask you a different set of 10 questions, and these are wholesome ones. So again, keep count of the number you answer yes to. Have you ever listened deeply to someone who needed to talk about a difficult problem, even though you had other things to do? Have you ever let someone in front of you in traffic? Have you ever brought in the bin, the newspaper, a parcel for a neighbour? Have you ever made or bought food when a friend was unwell? Have you ever paid for a friend's meal when they were in financial difficulty? Have you ever looked after someone else's child? Have you ever donated money to charity? Have you ever created something, an artwork, craft work, clothing, woodwork, as a gift for a friend or family? Have you ever picked up rubbish on the street or in the park or at the beach? Have you ever apologised for a mistake? We might have felt more comfortable to raise our hands in answering those ones. But as with the previous list, most of us would answer yes to many of these things. The human condition is such that we're also motivated by cooperation, kindness, care. We all experience beautiful mind states as well as the less skillful ones. And mindfulness of mind, this third foundation of mindfulness in the Satipatthana Sutta, is what we're going to be looking at in our meditation. It doesn't have any judgment about the content of the mind. It's simply asking us to know, to be aware, to be mindful of the state of the mind. And you'll remember when we did the mindfulness of the body and mindfulness of Vedana, feeling tone, that the orientation in the meditation is to develop that capacity to know the experience without attachment, without identification, without having a judgment around. And it's the same for mindfulness of mind. And supporting that is useful to remember that what arises in the mind can be caused by so many different, and our intention is only one of those factors, and it's not an especially powerful factor. So if you set an intention now to have a particular mind state for the 30 minutes that we're going to be meditating, I would bet a lot of money that you're going to be disappointed. It's maybe much more skillful to set an intention to be aware of the mind state that arises. And even that's a huge challenge because mindfulness comes and goes. So as we observe the mind as best we can, without attachment and without identification, we will be developing wisdom, and we'll be developing wisdom as to the nature of the mind. And the mind, like other phenomena, is characterized by three things. Excuse me. And I'm going to use the words that I heard first Jill Shepherd use about the 3 characteristics. Traditionally, they are in Pali: dukkha, anicca, anatta, suffering, impermanence, and non-self. Jill Shepherd talks about it as imperfect, dukkha, impermanent, the same, and impersonal, the non-self aspect. So the 3 imps, if you like: imperfect, impermanent, impersonal. And when we apply that to the mind-heart, this mind-heart until enlightenment is imperfect. It's at times unsatisfactory. Maybe it'll be tight or reactive or some other unpleasant mind state. It is from time to time. And that time to time also points to its impermanent nature. It will change. It will change during the meditation. And the mind is impersonal. Even though we feel it so much who we are, we're not even in full control of this mind. It's not self. So taking or observing those, taking those in can support our practice. And again, as with the first 2 foundations of mindfulness, I've drawn from Bhikkhu Analayo's approach, but any of the errors are mine, not his. So if you feel, we're about to move into the meditation, and if you feel like having a bit of a stretch or a move before we do, feel free. Our body might be happy that we did. And as you do the stretch, you might use the movement and the sensations as a way of establishing some mindfulness of the body. In this practice, I'll start with a little bit of mindfulness of the body. I'll remind us a little bit of mindfulness of feeling tones of Vedana, and then we'll move into mindfulness of mind. So finding the position that's right for you tonight. And that's already pointing to bringing a caring orientation to the body and to the heart. So setting up the practice with attention to what's most supportive for this body in this moment. How is the body? Getting a sense of its posture. Tuning into any sensations of the body. Knowing that the body is comprised of lots of different parts: skin, flesh, bones. So bringing an attitude of non-attachment as we bring mindfulness to the body. That might include the breath. The breath is part of the experience of the body. The expansion of the body on the in-breath and the letting go through the body on the out-breath. And as you tune into the body, maybe also at least nodding in the direction of Vedana or feeling tone. And just for a minute or so, noticing sensations in terms of the sensations being pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Last week we did 3 body scans, tuning into each of those qualities, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Just pausing for a moment with the question, what's the feeling tone? What's the affective quality of the body? The different sensations that you can feel. You don't choose the particular feeling tones, they're just coming and going, part of this experience, this present moment experience. With these foundations of mindfulness, we are establishing present moment awareness. As you tune into the body, that might give you some clues about how the mind is. You might find places of tension or tightness, contraction, that point to something in the mind, maybe. Or maybe the body is open, relaxed, settled. And that too relates to how the mind is. How is the mind? Moving the focus now from the body to the mind heart. Is it settled, busy, restless, expansive? Unsure, just deludedly ambling about the place? That question, how is the mind? It's not asking the mind to be any particular way, but it's bringing curiosity and care, interest to how the mind is. There's a real sense of acceptance of the mind as a changing, moving process that we can be with, we can know. Having established or stabilized attention through the body, through Vedana, now opening up to this present moment experience of the mind, it's quite possible, quite likely really, that mindfulness will be present, that you're aware of how the mind is, more or less. And that's a really useful thing to know. How does it feel in the mind when mindfulness is present? Maybe stable, maybe alert, spacious, gentle, receptive. What's the texture of the mind, the flavor of the mind when mindfulness is present? Developing some intimacy with a mind that has mindfulness present. Developing the capacity to know the difference when we lose mindfulness. How does that feel? When mindfulness is lost. We're also interested in that. Understanding, knowing the mind in all its different states. Monitoring what's happening within. And at some point, we will become aware that the mind has wandered off. How does that feel? It might depend on where it wandered to, whether it was rehashing the past or yearning for something, worrying about the future, or just sort of ambling along in fantasy. We don't need to rush back. It's an opportunity to learn a little more about those mind states. You might even notice the feeling tone associated with the mind state, whether it feels pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And you might particularly notice whether the mind state was flavored by an unwholesome state or a wholesome state. Was it connected to greed, wanting, desire, or anger, ill will, hatred? How do they feel? They'll feel very different. Learning to recognize them, developing intimacy with those mind states. Or maybe just deluded. How does that feel? Confused, perhaps, zoned out. Or maybe there was a wholesome mind state. Care, connection, kindness. Or maybe simply the wholesomeness of mindfulness, present moment awareness. What's the texture of the mind? As we pay attention to the mind heart, the mind states, it can sometimes help to feel into the body as an anchor, as a place to rest in as we observe the mind. So if that feels useful, feel free. I'm going to be quiet now for the next 10 or 12 minutes. as we cultivate mindfulness of mind, awareness of how the mind is, without judgment, without identification, just watching, investigating the changing contents and attitudes, textures of the mind. And as we're coming towards the end of the meditation, just noticing, how's the mind now? Without judgment, simply with a curious, caring interest. What changes have you observed in the mind over the last 30 minutes? Has it been possible to stand back from the content of the mind and observe without identifying, without seeing it as who you are, whatever's going on? It's a challenge. How is the practice for you tonight? So before I open it up to the group for comments and questions, reflections, there's just a few more reflections that I'd like to make about this practice of cultivating mindfulness of mind-heart. And as I do this, I'm wanting to say also that at one level, the meditation hasn't finished. Our formal sit for 30 minutes has finished, but this is still an opportunity to continue cultivating mindfulness of mind, noticing as I speak what gets generated, what arises, might be connected to what I say, might be connected to completely other things. And I'm just noticing my mind, because here in the background the fireworks have started. I mentioned to some people who were here earlier that I'm living very close to what we call our showgrounds, and it's the Perth Royal Show at the moment. And every night at, I guess, shortly after 8 o'clock our time, the fireworks go off. So part of my mind is noticing that. The meditation, the Satipatthana Sutta, inviting us to turn towards the body, inviting us to turn towards feeling tones, inviting us to turn towards our mind, is in some ways balancing what happens as we go about our normal business usually, where all our attention is on the external world. So the Satipatthana Sutta is saying, yeah, good. and also pay attention to what goes on inside, so that we become more aware of the things that can drive us, the urges, the thoughts, the emotions, the things that happen below the level of awareness. And so we bring through this practice into the light of day those thoughts, urges, impulses, reactions that often will make us act without us even knowing that they're doing it. And by bringing mindfulness to what's going on underneath, we get more choice. We get to see whether or not where those thoughts, feelings, beliefs, urges are moving us is what's going to be in our best interest, in the best interest of those around us. So we're bringing into the spotlight things that can so easily in our daily life pass unnoticed, and yet they are major players in our behaviour. So it's really useful. And just reiterating that in this third foundation of mindfulness, we are not trying to achieve a particular state of mind. Rather, we are becoming aware of the state of mind that we have. So we will have thoughts, feelings, urges, some unwholesome, some wholesome, and observing them, we can also bring that understanding that it's not personal. The thoughts that we have, we didn't sit down and think, those are the thoughts I'm going to have. The emotions that we have, we didn't sit down and think, I'm going to have that anger. These things arise conditioned by lots of different things. And one of the things that we're conditioned by is simply being an animal, a mammal that wants to survive. And we want to survive in an environment that doesn't always give us what we want when we want it. So we are programmed to chase resources, food, sex, shelter, safety. We are programmed to run away from the things that we perceive might harm us. So the things that we see in the mind, some wholesome, some unwholesome, are part of the human condition. And our job is to understand how they operate, to learn to relate to them, and in that way learn to minimize the harm that they can do us and others, to have more choice. I can't remember who it was, but recently I heard somebody describe this practice as holding whatever's in the mind like a mother or father holds a baby. What a beautiful way to approach the things in the mind, with understanding and empathy. And that goes for the things that we want to have in our mind and the things that we would prefer not to. And this third foundation of mindfulness is asking us to be really clear when unwholesome mind states are present, and also when they're not. Right now, do you have any lust, anger, and delusion in your mind? Maybe, maybe not. I think my sense is that in the West, in modern life, we are so much quicker to identify the unskillful states of the mind and identify with them, and forget that actually for a large part of the time they're not there. And that's to be recognised and celebrated, that we have those capacities as well. One thing I haven't mentioned, but I just want to name, and I'm not going to go into any detail around, is that the Satipatthana Sutta, in all of its, in the first three foundations of mindfulness, ask us to be mindful of the first one, body, second one, Vedana, third one, mind, both internally and externally. And that's a really interesting invitation to take these practices into the world. So we know what's going on inside us, and we can also observe it in other people. What's going on in the mind of that other person? Now, won't be able to guess it perfectly, but maybe you can see on somebody's face, oh, that could be anger. Maybe we could see on somebody's face, oh, that looks like empathy. So we're invited to cultivate mindfulness of mind, both internally and externally. And Bhikkhu Analayo interprets that as in those around us. I think there are a lot of different interpretations of that part of the sutta, but even if whatever the correct interpretation, it seems a really wise thing to do as well, to be able to bring mindfulness to those around us as well as to our own experience. Now, as I mentioned before, we did the meditation. The Satipatthana Sutta explores a lot more aspects of mind and body and Vedana than I've done in these sessions. So just wanting to reiterate that this is not a thorough exploration. So please feel free to explore if you're interested. Okay, so they are the post-meditation reflections that I was thinking of making, and I'd love to hear your experience of the meditation, or any comments, or any questions. Sky, I see you've unmuted. Yeah.
Yeah, that was just wonderful. Just what I needed, all of it, because going out of my mind all the I realized that it's no easy task to be a human being today whatsoever.
Mm.
Having just buried my sister, well, cremated her, we had her celebration of life. I have a lot to think about on words on a headstone. Don't have a headstone, but lots of words of beloved and just love. I mean, I had the most difficult task being her sister, but she was surrounded by love, and she emanated quite a bit of love. And I realized from a family point of view that a beloved, once they pass, no matter what their past was and their whatever we judged them for, unfortunately, and what they had to experience to get through the human nature of life, and how they conditioned them, how they managed their own conditioning, how they go from being a hard experienced person to almost sainthood, at least in the Christian surrounding that I was immersed. I've been immersed in for years. That's a whole other topic about me being the only Buddhist and a sea of Christians. At times was terribly uncomfortable, but I had to just forget about me and remember what the main thing was. Another thing was beautiful. I had a experience with my sister in a business marketing thing for many years. And the owner of that company used to give a very powerful speech about the dash between the year, your birth date and your death date. What are you doing with your dash? That little tiny line that connects the two important things. I just wanted to mention that about what we're doing with our dashes. Are we purifying? I mean, I know what I'm trying to do, and I'm not trying to judge myself with what little I do end up doing, which is probably more than somebody else, but certainly less than even somebody else. So I just have to remember to stay just with whatever I can handle. I understand that part of it. But I'm really excited about your 4 stages of mindfulness, because it's really putting it nicely together for me.
Not mine.
No, not yours.
But thank you.
Yes, you know what I mean, Kathryn.
Yeah.
Your presentation.
Thank you.
Your 4 weeks. Your mission of 4 weeks. It's just lovely.
Yeah.
And thank you for that.
Yeah. Thanks, Sky. And
I just wanted to tell you my thoughts.
I appreciate that. And what it raised for me, I mean, there are lots of different things, but that last little bit about that sense that it's not a level playing field that we start from when we at this stage of life trying to meet what is here. Each of the people here, we all have different possibilities, we all have different limitations, we all have different conditioning. And so for some people, it's more straightforward to live from a place of open-hearted presence, stability, etc. For some of us, for whatever conditioning, wounding, etc. in the past, it's more difficult. So it's helpful not to do that comparison and just know that we're doing the best that we can. Yeah. Thank you. Sam.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for the talk. By the way, I am Sam. I'm from Florida. I'm kind of new here. So thanks for having me. But during the meditation, I guess what I was thinking of was kind of the distinction between what is from the brain and what is from the mind as well, because sometimes I feel like what comes from my brain can actually be kind of helpful if I identify with it. For example, I feel like my brain is what tells me I am hungry, and if I don't, say I am hungry and identify with that, then maybe I won't eat and things like that. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts on like what might the distinction there be, and like what might come from the brain and can be helpful, and then from the mind that can maybe be not so helpful and too much.
I wonder if the word identify might be useful to open up a bit, because certainly we want to be listening to our body. Certainly we want to be listening to what our senses tell us. You walk in a place in a city that you've never been in, you want to be listening to those messages that you might be receiving that say, it might be better not to be walking here alone at night by yourself, or whatever it is. So absolutely important not to discount the information that we get from our senses, and our senses are all processed through our brain. So yes, identify, I would use it more in that fixed sense of this is who I am. So I am and when we go back to some of the mind states, the first one that popped into my mind, and I can connect to some conditioning around this, I am a greedy person. So the sense of identity that can close us down, that can fix us in a particular way, that doesn't allow for the reality of change, that doesn't allow for the reality of this experience of being a human being as one which is fluid rather than fixed and stable and unchanging. you also talked about the mind and the brain, and that's a huge topic. Certainly both are at play, and I'm no expert, but certainly both are at play all the time in our experience. And my sense is that there is benefit in having an understanding of the brain and what's happening at that very physiological level, as well as the subjective experience of having a mind. We can learn about the brain. We can learn about for example, we can learn about how the brain perceives and how that affects then how we might experience something at the subjective level. So both are useful. I doubt that I've answered your question, Sam, or you're wondering, but I don't know. Is there anything more you'd like to say on that?
No, thank you. And I guess maybe it was more of a comment and stuff, but I do appreciate you kind of taking it in and the way you put it made a lot of sense to me. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And welcome for coming along. We've got Sky as well from Florida, so you've got neighbours. You're probably several thousand kilometres apart. I don't know how big Florida is, but yeah.
I'm in Fort Lauderdale.
Okay, we're close then. I'm in Southwest Branches.
Oh, okay, cool. Should hook up.
Sounds good. Any other comments or reflections? Yeah, Nikki.
Hi.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm okay. Thank you for from the beginning to now, actually, what you were saying. And interestingly, the meditation I think it took away, made me feel worse. But it's all right. It made me feel, because it made me feel really scared. So I think what happened was all those things like the drowsiness, I think at the moment, it's like a protective factor, won't allow me into, it's like a delusion, really. So I got into a state of fear. And like, there's been talk of death, contemplation of death. And so mine's changed, whereas I don't want to think about death at all. Whereas I know we're advised, aren't we? Like Ajahn Brahmali's meditation on that, I used to do regularly. And I don't think it would be the same for me now. I used to think I would, I'm okay about death. I really thought that, and I would proudly boast actually that was the case. But I don't think I am. And so when you meditate, and then the critical voice comes in saying, don't say this to people. They'll think you've been miserable again. It's like, comes in. It's like almost I'm not allowed to speak my truth. The critic, it's, being real, I suppose, is like I haven't got a light, doesn't feel very spiritual approach. It's absolute. I really hate what's happening. So what am I trying to say? I suppose I just want to use the opportunities to say what it's like with people that aren't hopefully going to run away, because the people around me can't bear it. So it makes it quite difficult. It makes it quite difficult to just live, actually. And then when I'm told to live well, I think I'm messing it up. Because of the state of my mind. I don't think I am. I think it's just probably quite normal. It feels ever so miserable. I don't want to be miserable. Don't I?
Nikki,
sorry if I brought the tone down.
The contemplation that we've been doing is to know the experience that we're having, and this is the experience that you're having. I think there's a real significant additional layer of suffering that comes when we're not able to share the truth of our experience, and when the messages we receive, and I'm not only thinking about you now, I'm thinking about other situations as well, but where the messages that we receive say we have to experience in this way. This is the only way we're allowed to experience it. And when that's not our truth, not to be able to share what we're experiencing is a really additional level of suffering. So I really understand the challenge of living at times with fear, at times with despair, at times with anger potentially, you know, all of these very real emotions that we feel in difficult situations, and not being able to share it. It's a very real suffering.
Thanks, Kathryn.
Separate to the fear, you know, and the anger and on all of that. Not being able to share it and not being and being shut down when we look for a place to share it. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, feel better.
It's all welcome.
Thank you.
Geeta.
Yes, I wanted to make a comment on that, Nikki. As you said, when you experience death as something not nearby, it's much easier to know or feel that there's no fears anymore about it. But when it comes close, there's a lot of things change, right? And I think apart from what you're saying, there is underlying that something that we don't always recognize is that at this stage, there's so many physiological changes going on that actually it is hard to think how you would have thought before. So these depressive thoughts and feelings are quite overwhelming, and it's not just about your spiritual practice. Your brain is actually giving you quite different messages, and that's very hard to for you to understand and for other people to understand. How, you know, people who've known you in other ways before. So I think we underestimate how much this physiological state drives some of our emotions. And I feel that it's for example, feeling sadness and anxiety and depression, this can be quite a new experience for some people who've not had to go through this before, a life-threatening illness. And yeah, I just want to make the point, and I also relate to the point that it actually does drive other people away, so that you are not able to communicate with others without driving them further away. So you kind of get isolated within your bubble of all these mixed feelings. And yeah, there's quite a bit of despair sometimes. And I can only hope that there will be one or two people who are able to bear it, who are around you, you know. Sometimes it's not a friend, it might be someone who you deal with professionally or, that can withstand it. But yeah, I can relate to some of what you're saying because I didn't expect to experience this myself. And when this was starting to happen, it just so happened that one thing that clicked when this depressive thoughts and feelings came strongly was I was suddenly kind of quite surprised. But then I also realized that what was happening in that instance was that some of the medications I was taking had this side effect, which I hadn't quite twigged until that moment. So what I'm saying is there are some chemical and biological things going on that color this picture.
Thanks, Geeta, and your many decades of medical experience, as well as personal experience, are very valuable. So thank you all. Lovely to spend some time with you. Lovely for our minds to have been approached a little bit. And maybe one of the things that can be helpful in this mindfulness of mind exploration also is to just have a sense of the difference between the awareness of what we're experiencing and the content. So the fear, the hope, the greed, the whatever it is, and to play between sitting in the awareness, which of course isn't the greed, isn't the anger, isn't the fear, and notice that movement between feeling connected, combined with the emotion, and then at times being able to stand back into the awareness, which is separate from the mind state. The awareness knows the mind state. So that's part of what we're doing in developing mindfulness of mind as well. So a lifetime's work, as with all of this. Look forward to seeing you next week, some of you. And in the meantime, go well. Thanks, everybody.